Get out of here, you high school grod hag.
My heart thumped hard in my chest. The smile directed at me by Rachel was sinister, almost reminiscent of a witch.
I really wish that shabby old couple hadn't shown up. Anyway, thanks for the gift money.
With that, she turned her back to me. Knowing Rachel's true nature, any desire to genuinely celebrate her was gone. As the groom made a brief greeting and the two were about to leave, my husband, Bob, who was beside me, stood up and said, "Shall we go?" "Yes."
Hey, everyone, we're leaving.
At that moment, as if they had been waiting for Bob's words, nearly everyone except for the bride's personal friends stood up simultaneously.
What's going on?
Even Rachel, who always seemed so composed, raised her voice in shock as she stared at the bizarre scene unfolding in front of her. I had been holding back, considering the occasion was a wedding, but I had reached my limit. I slowly stood up and spoke. "Just as you wished, Rachel, we'll be taking our leave. My name is Catherine Miller, 55 years old. I live with my beloved husband, Bob, and our only son, Ethan. Ethan runs his own business. Usually, he's so calm that I sometimes wondered how he managed as a CEO. But it turns out he's quite resourceful and handles things well. Ethan has moved out and lives on his own, but recently he mentioned he's planning to move in with his girlfriend. As for me, I run a flower shop. I rent a small building near our home and run a modest business there. Most of my customers are from the local community, though we occasionally receive requests from businesses. For example, weddings, funerals. Wedding requests in particular are frequent. Flowers are companions that stay by your side in every moment. Whether in times of joy or sorrow, they are there. I love flowers for that very reason. My customers come with all sorts of stories. Some want to send a bouquet to their loved ones, while others want to place their late parents' favorite flower on their grave. Every person who comes to buy flowers has their own story, and for the past 10 years, I've run my shop, providing comfort to them, making it a beloved part of the community. One day, a certain person came to visit me.
It's been a while, hasn't it, Catherine?
"Is that you, Rachel?" It was Rachel Anderson, a former colleague I worked with during my days as an office worker. After I left my previous job and joined mid-career, starting as a regular employee, she joined the company as a new graduate the following year. Although there was an age difference, we were considered colleagues at that time. I had been offered a position, but since it was a fresh start in a new field, I turned it down on purpose. Meeting Rachel again felt like the calm before the storm. I almost felt my face tense up, but managed to smile. "It really has been a long time. What brings you here today?" Since I was at work, I decided to treat Rachel as just another customer. Rachel glanced around the store, then let out a small, mocking laugh.
I was wondering what you've been doing since leaving the company, and it turns out you're running this mediocre flower shop.
There was obvious malice in her words. I had been keeping up my business smile, but this comment was too much. I couldn't hold back and retorted, "What would you know about this place, coming here for the first time? If you're just here to make fun, you can leave." I turned my back on her as I spoke. For some reason, Rachel started laughing.
Aren't you going to hear me out?
"If you have a reason other than mocking me, I'll listen," I said calmly, not wanting her to linger in my shop any longer. Rachel shrugged.
Still the same attitude, I see. Not very charming, are you? Oh, sorry. I forgot. Nobody expects charm from a woman over 50.
More insults. Rachel only seemed to know how to belittle others when she opened her mouth. Feeling my frustration bubble up, I said firmly, "If you have something to say, say it now." Finally, Rachel seemed ready to get to the point. She rummaged through her bag and handed me something. It was a neatly sealed envelope. An invitation.
Yes. Actually, I'm getting married soon. I've been with him for 5 years, and we're finally having the wedding. I really hope you and your husband can come.
I couldn't help but furrow my brow, glancing back and forth between the invitation and Rachel's face. Why would she come to give me an invitation now, after more than 10 years since I left the company? As I was thinking that, Rachel explained.
I changed jobs to my current company a year ago. My father is the president there, and the company I'm at now runs a business related to weddings and funerals. So we sometimes buy bouquets from florists. It just so happens that your shop, Catherine, is one of them.
A little while ago, I started doing business with Rachel's new company. When she discovered my flower shop, she mentioned offhandedly that I was her old coworker from a previous jobs, and her father, upon hearing that, insisted she invite me to the wedding.
Apparently, our company considers your shop an important partner. We've been working with you for a while, so my dad told me I had to invite you. Honestly, I didn't really want to, but my dad insisted. He's under the impression that we have a good relationship. So, that's that. Hope you can make it.
With that, Rachel said her piece and quickly left. When I got home, I told my husband, Bob, about Rachel. Since he'd heard about her when I was still working at my old company, he frowned.
You can just turn it down. Do you really need to go to a wedding you were reluctantly invited to?
Honestly, I don't want to go either. We both slumped in our seats. However, Mr. Anderson, Rachel's father, had become a frequent client of my shop, even though it had only been a short time since we started working together. Also, Mr. Anderson probably didn't tell Rachel to invite us with any ill intent. It's true that Mr. Anderson had taken a liking to our flowers and placed several large orders. From our perspective, his company could become an important client in the future. There was no other option but to commit to this. I'm sure Mr. Anderson thought that his daughter, Rachel, had received some help from me at her previous jobs and figured it would be a nice gesture to invite us. It's been over 10 years, so refusing might come off as rude. Shall we go? When I said that, Bob looked somewhat reluctant but nodded. As I lowered my eyes to Rachel's name on the invitation, memories from the past began to resurface. 10 years ago, when Rachel and I were colleagues. Back then, all I knew was that she was the daughter of a company president. Rachel was arrogant, selfish, and acted as she pleased.
Still just a regular employee at your age? So lame. Isn't it embarrassing to be working alongside a young girl like me?
I endured her taunts every day. Apparently, she had taken the jobs as training to eventually take over her father's company. Even with her behavior, the then president always catered to her moods. There was probably some influence behind the scenes, but that only encouraged her bad behavior to escalate. I eventually grew tired of it and decided to quit, opening my flower shop instead. Rachel apparently stayed on, and after completing her 10-year training period, now works at Mr. Anderson's company. She's likely putting on a good front for her father. Otherwise, there's no way Mr. Anderson would let her be. That's why, when she was told to invite me, it seemed like she reluctantly reached out, afraid of having the past dredged up. I wasn't enthusiastic, but I convinced myself that attending was necessary for the future of my flower shop and prepared for the wedding day. Even at a glance, there were well over 300 guests. As I checked in at the reception, a woman who heard my name suddenly started searching for something in a fluster. A moment later, she pulled out an item from under the reception table, which Bob, who was also filling out the guest book beside me, took. It was a pamphlet and seating chart, identical to what the other guests received. Even though they were supposed to hand out the same items to all guests, mine seemed to have been stored separately. I felt a slight unease. The ceremony went smoothly, and after the bouquet toss, the staff directed us to move to the reception hall. I took out the seating chart and looked for my name. The moment I read the words, I gasped. Bob, noticing my reaction, glanced at my seating chart. He quickly did the same. I rubbed my eyes in disbelief. No matter how many times I looked, it wasn't a mistake.
This can't be. Old lady?
Bob muttered in astonishment. Above my name on the seating chart, it simply said, Old Lady. Normally, it should have read, Bride's Friend or Bride's Colleague. But my title was an insult. Bob couldn't stay silent.
Did the staff approve this seating chart as is?
The staff member, hearing Bob's question, rushed over and began checking. There was no way they didn't notice while printing the seating chart. It was so blatantly out of place, written above the guest's name. But the staff's response was unexpected.
The seating charts handed to the other guests list you as a friend of the bride.
So, this seating chart alone says Old Lady? Everyone present must have thought the same thing. How did such a thing get mixed in with the others? I couldn't figure it out. However, one thing came to mind. Now that I think about it, the receptionist was rummaging under the table when she handed me the seating chart. This was the source of the discomfort I felt earlier. In other words, someone had tampered specifically with my seating chart. The prank was so childish that Bob and I put our hands to our foreheads and looked up at the ceiling. I didn't blame the receptionist. She had only panicked and searched for something when she heard my name. And there was no hint of malice or disdain in her expression. That left only one possible answer. Rachel must have prepared this on purpose and told the receptionist, just hand this out, without explaining anything. It was something she would do. I resisted the urge to crush the seating chart with the insult printed on it. It wasn't the right time for that. I reminded myself to stay composed and managed to get through it. Before long, the reception was ready, and the MC signaled for the bride and groom to enter the hall. Rachel's hair and makeup had changed since earlier, revealing how much effort she had put into this event. For a while, she made no move toward me. Accompanied by the groom, Rachel visited each table, posing for photos and chatting happily. Finally, she reached our table. As I braced myself, Rachel leaned in and whispered so that only I could hear.
Get out, you high school grod hag.
My heart pounded. Rachel's smile was as unsettling as that of a witch. Goosebumps rose on my skin, and I couldn't look her in the eye. Taking advantage of this, Rachel continued.
You should have realized when you saw the seating chart. You were never really invited. I only invited you because Dad insisted, and you're a business partner. To be honest, it was all for the wedding gift money. So hurry up and leave.
The reception was midway through, and some guests, already tipsy, weren't paying attention to us. Rachel took full advantage of this.
I really didn't want an old couple like you here. Anyway, thanks for the gift.
With that, she turned her back to us. The groom, busy entertaining his drunken friends, hadn't noticed what Rachel had done. "Oh, I was just chatting for a bit. How about you? Did you get some good photos?" When the groom called out to her, Rachel dropped her chilling smile and adopted a serene expression reminiscent of a goddess's smile. The speed of her change was terrifying. The groom, completely taken in, blushed at her smile. Normally, this would be a heartwarming moment. But with the seating chart and Rachel's true nature revealed, any desire to celebrate them was gone. As the groom finished his brief greeting and they moved to leave, Bob stood up and said, "Should we go?" The groom and Rachel both turned to us with surprised expressions. "Yes." Bob nodded deeply and, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, said something shocking.
All right, everyone, we're heading out.
At that moment, as if waiting for Bob's words, almost everyone except the bride's personal friends stood up at once.
What?
Even Rachel couldn't help but let out a stunned voice as she stared at the bizarre scene unfolding before her. I had been holding back because it was a wedding, but I'd reached my limit. I stood up slowly and spoke. "As you wished, Rachel, we'll be leaving." A murmur spread through the room as I proudly declared this. Meanwhile, Rachel, who couldn't comprehend what was happening, was flustered.
What is this? What's going on?
Rachel, as well as the groom, were wide-eyed with shock. Then, one of the guests who had stood up slowly approached us, and he greeted Bob. "President," he said.
President? Does that mean everyone who stood up is your husband's subordinates? But why?
Rachel, breaking her usual composed demeanor, began shouting. I turned to her and spoke calmly. "You didn't even know the face of the head of the parent company, did you? My husband runs the company that oversees the group of businesses, and one of those businesses happens to be your father's company. Right, Bob?" I glanced at Bob, who nodded silently. At that moment, Mr. Anderson finally came running toward us. It seemed he had no idea that Bob was attending. Actually, Mr. Anderson had personally reached out to Bob, asking him to attend the wedding because his daughter was getting married. This had happened before I received the invitation from Rachel. However, Bob knew what Rachel had done to me and declined at that time, as it wasn't an official invitation. But when Rachel came to me directly with the invitation, Bob decided to attend alongside me. Of course, Mr. Anderson never imagined that my husband was the president who led their parent company. If you had done a little more research on me, you might have avoided this situation. But judging by the seating chart full of malice, it's clear you didn't bother and resorted to your old tricks, didn't you? At my words, Rachel fell silent and looked down. Mr. Anderson, with a confused expression, asked, "Seating chart?" I showed him the one with the insult written on it. His face turned from pale to ashen in an instant. Mr. Anderson began apologizing profusely to us. He lamented that his well-intentioned invitation had resulted in making us feel uncomfortable. In front of her father, who was apologizing incessantly, Rachel just stood there trembling. Bob, who had been observing quietly, muttered, without looking at anyone in particular,
I told my subordinates to attend in my place to celebrate your daughter's wedding. After all, the more people celebrating, the better, right?
Of course, Bob covered all the costs of their gifts. When he informed Mr. Anderson that his subordinates would be attending, Mr. Anderson had been overjoyed. Rachel likely thought, if I get close to the subordinates chosen by the president of the group, it'll benefit me when I eventually take over my father's role. That's why Bob's subordinates were there as guests on the bride's side, but now, following his command, they all began to leave the venue.
Wait, please.
Rachel, with a desperate look, reached out, but no one listened to her words.
Mr. Anderson, this is truly disappointing. I did feel some regret after declining your initial invitation, but my wife had previously suffered harassment from your daughter, so I had no choice. That said, I have always appreciated your support, Mr. Anderson, so I sent my subordinates as a gesture of goodwill.
Bob paused, his previously calm demeanor shifting to a tone as cold as ice.
However, seeing your daughter treat my wife like this again, I can't simply overlook it. I'm not willing to just let this go, so I'll be leaving along with my subordinates and my wife. Oh, and please accept the wedding gift as a token of goodwill. I'll be reconsidering our relationship going forward.
As soon as Bob finished speaking, he took my hand and started walking toward the exit at an incredible pace.
No, please wait.
Rachel, trying desperately to stop us, called out frantically. But Mr. Anderson and the groom stood in her way.
Dad and you. If we don't stop them, the whole wedding will be ruined.
I glanced back once and glared at Rachel as I spoke. It's too late. The moment you wrote those insults on my seating chart, you set this in motion. You brought this on yourself. Reflect on your actions.
No.
Turning my back to Rachel once more, I walked out with Bob. As soon as we stepped out of the venue, the tension that had been holding me together snapped, and tears began to flow uncontrollably. The next day, I learned what had happened with the wedding. Apparently, it had been canceled altogether. Under normal circumstances, they could have demanded compensation from us for causing a disruption, but given the situation, that didn't happen. Rachel herself had shown a spiteful attitude toward me, and Mr. Anderson had stopped any talk of damages, saying it would be embarrassing to pursue such claims. I also heard that the groom was shocked to discover the true nature of the woman he had chosen, so much so that he was reluctant to move in with her after the wedding. Friends who witnessed the incident took Rachel's actions to heart, and none of them sided with her. In the end, Mr. Anderson took charge, announcing the cancellation of the reception and turning it into a dinner gathering, with all the wedding gifts to be returned to the guests. Later, Mr. Anderson reached out to us, saying he wished to formally apologize, and Bob and I agreed to meet him. However, before that could happen, Rachel showed up at our houses unannounced. When the doorbell rang, I opened the front door to find Rachel standing there, her face puffed up and showing every sign of annoyance. I couldn't help but widen my eyes in surprise, but I spoke to her firmly. It's inconvenient for you to show up unannounced like this. You need to follow proper protocol. Despite my warning, Rachel didn't seem to hear me at all. With her cheeks puffed out like a hamster's, she scolded me.
Because of you, yesterday's wedding was ruined. We had 300 guests, and I was humiliated in front of everyone. My husband has even said he doesn't feel confident about our marriage and has rejected moving in. My father told me not to come to work for a while and to stay home and reflect.
It seemed she had come without an appointment to vent her frustrations, blaming me for putting her in this situation. I was too stunned to respond at first. As I told her yesterday, this was her own doing. Standing firmly at the entrance, I told her, "If you didn't want this, you shouldn't have invited me in the first place. Yet, you went out of your way to personally hand me the invitation, leaving me unable to refuse. And who was it that wrote 'old lady' on my seating chart and picked a fight during the reception?" Rachel fell silent, unable to respond, her body trembling as she stood there. I let out a small sigh and urged her to leave. "Mr. Anderson will be formally apologizing later, and I plan to let this matter rest then. This is a personal issue, so we will continue our professional relationship with him. My husband feels the same way. Since you've been told to reflect at home, you should take this time to cool your head." As I finished speaking and moved to close the door, Rachel's hand shot out to stop it.
I'm sorry, it was my fault.
Her sudden apology caught me off guard, and I paused, my hand still on the door. "What's brought this on?" I looked at her with a puzzled expression, and Rachel spoke through heavy tears.
I've been abandoned by my friends, and even the people from the companies I invited to the wedding are avoiding me. No matter how much my father apologizes, the way people see me won't change.
That was true. Even if we reconciled and declared that we would continue our professional relationship, Rachel's actions wouldn't be forgotten. At least you understand that. Accept that you were in the wrong this time and reflect on it. There's nothing more I can do for you.
That's why we need people to see us making up. Please help me show that we've reconciled.
Rachel gripped the edge of the door, trying to push it open. I resisted, attempting to close it, and a silent struggle ensued. The commotion must have caught Bob's attention as he came over from the living room.
Oh, Rachel, didn't your father tell you to stay at home and wait until he came to formally apologize?
After explaining Rachel's actions and motives to Bob, he seemed to feel the same way I did, letting out a small sigh.
It seems you're misunderstanding something. Whether we cooperate or not is up to my wife, not you. And how do you think your colleagues would react if they saw a forced display of reconciliation? It would only make them disappointed, thinking, "There she goes again." If you have time to barge into our home, you should be writing a letter of reflection.
Bob was usually gentle and rarely got angry. But facing Rachel, he seemed to have switched into work mode, speaking to her in a tone that was one notch lower than usual, calmly advising her. Knowing Bob's true identity, Rachel couldn't afford to act recklessly any longer. She left in a hurry, almost as if fleeing. A week later, although both of us were busy with work and finding time was difficult, we received a formal apology from Mr. Anderson. As he apologized in our living room, Bob and I spoke up. "Mr. Anderson, we also apologize for causing such a scene.
Both my wife and I wish to maintain a positive relationship with you moving forward."
Mr. Anderson looked deeply moved by our words, nodding several times before engaging in some light conversation. We then saw him off. Since then, Rachel hadn't made any notable moves. She had been taking time off work, and any talk of her becoming the next CEO seemed to have dissipated. Looking at Bob, I voiced my concern. It feels like this ended rather quickly, don't you think?
It should be fine. If she truly reflects on this, including what happened 10 years ago, it'll be for the best.
But Rachel made one last attempt. The day after Mr. Anderson's apology, Rachel once again showed up at our house unannounced.
Well, as a token of my apology, here.
I don't need it. Once again, the quiet battle at the entrance began. Rachel seemed determined to enter the house, while I, sensing an unpleasant feeling, hoped she would just leave. Even the box of sweets she brought as a token of her apology seemed suspicious, making it impossible to accept it in good faith. If she were genuinely remorseful, she wouldn't approach things so aggressively. I simply couldn't bring myself to trust Rachel.
Please let me in. I want to properly apologize just like my father did.
There had to be an ulterior motive. As we continued our back and forth, I heard a familiar voice coming from behind Rachel.
What's going on here?
Oh, Ethan, you're early. Standing behind Rachel was Ethan. He had mentioned he'd be visiting for the first time in a while, so we were expecting him. A petite woman peeked out from behind Ethan. It was Miranda, his fiancée. Look, Ethan and Miranda are about to come inside. As far as your situation goes, it was resolved with Mr. Anderson's apology. There's almost no reason for us to have any further contact. So please, Rachel, just go home. At that moment, I noticed a change. Ethan and Miranda both wore serious expressions, and Rachel had turned pale. What's going on with you two? Unable to make sense of the situation, I watched as Ethan sighed and stepped closer to Rachel. Then, with a fierce look, he spoke.
Are you still stalking us?
The unexpected word from Ethan's mouth made me gasp in shock. It turned out that Rachel and Ethan had once been in a relationship. However, unable to endure Rachel's extreme possessiveness, Ethan had broken up with her, which led to her obsessively following him. Rachel's stalking began after Ethan started dating Miranda. Not only did Rachel harass Ethan, but she also targeted Miranda with threats, to the point where law enforcement had to get involved.
It wasn't long ago that you came over saying you wanted to apologize, remember? The contents turned out to be all spoiled food, which shocked both Miranda and me.
Hearing Ethan's words, I slowly glanced at the paper bag Rachel was holding. Noticing my gaze, Rachel tried to hide it.
No, this is just. I didn't know that Ethan's mother was Catherine. Anyway, I'm leaving now.
As Rachel tried to make a hasty escape, I grabbed her arm and spoke slowly. Hey, isn't that supposed to be an apology gift for Bob and me? I've changed my mind. I'll accept it now. When I said that with my brightest smile, Rachel's face went pale, and she shook her head. From her reaction and Ethan's story, it was clear that whatever was inside wasn't good. With me in front of her, and Ethan and Miranda behind, Rachel had no way out. Just then, a car pulled up in front of the house, and Mr. Anderson stepped out.
Dad, why are you here?
I called him.
Turning around, I saw Bob standing in the doorway, holding his phone. Apparently, he had contacted Mr. Anderson and had been recording the scene for a while.
Mr. Anderson, please take a look at this.
After confirming Ethan's account and Rachel's suspicious behavior, Mr. Anderson yanked the paper bag out of her hands.
Stop it.
Despite her protests, Mr. Anderson tore off the wrapping paper, revealing what was inside. It was spoiled garbage. The foul smell made everyone instinctively cover their noses. Rachel, with her actions now fully exposed, collapsed to her knees.
Why? Why does nothing go my way?
Until the bitter end, it seemed she had hoped to humiliate me. When I looked toward Mr. Anderson's car, I saw Rachel's husband sitting in the driver's seat, watching us intently through the open window. He rolled down the window and stared at us. Knowing he could hear the conversation, I raised my voice slightly and said, "Hey, Ethan, you started dating Miranda 2 years ago, right? And it was 2 years ago when you mentioned breaking up, wasn't it?"
Oh yeah. That's right.
So 4 years ago, you and Rachel were dating, correct? But wait, isn't that strange? Rachel said she'd been involved with her husband for 5 years now. I remember her saying that clearly. I recalled Rachel mentioning this the day she brought the invitation. Suddenly, Rachel's face went pale, and she began to tremble. She instinctively turned to flee. But Mr. Anderson swiftly restrained her.
Wait, listen, that's not true.
Desperately trying to make excuses, she was placed in the back seat by Mr. Anderson, who then turned to speak to Rachel's husband, sitting in the driver's seat. My raised voice had reached him too, and his expression was visibly tense. Even after the car door closed, Rachel's wailing could still be heard. Mr. Anderson gave me a slight nod before the car drove off. As it disappeared from view, we exchanged a wry smile, finally feeling the storm had passed. Later, I heard that Rachel and her husband divorced due to her infidelity. Naturally, she was required to pay alimony. Because of the incident at the wedding, her husband insisted on a lump sum payment. Rachel reportedly had to borrow money. Although Mr. Anderson covered all the wedding expenses, he severed ties with Rachel, treating that payment as a settlement. With no one to turn to, she found herself without any support. I heard she left the company quietly. Now, she's said to be juggling multiple part-time jobs just to make ends meet and repay her debts, living in a state of torment. The title of being the daughter of a company president is a double-edged sword. While it offers a favorable position, mishandling it can lead to severe consequences. The fact that Rachel is currently unable to work at a reputable company is proof enough of this. Bob's company is a nationally renowned corporation, and the company headed by Mr. Anderson, while not small, is part of an impressive group of enterprises. Rumors had spread about Rachel's infidelity and her insulting behavior toward guests at her wedding. This made her job search particularly difficult. It's said that she still regrets digging her own grave, but it was her own doing. After everything settled down, Bob and I attended a wedding. This time the event was for Ethan and his wife, Miranda. The unpleasant memories from Rachel's incident at the previous wedding were replaced by the joy of this beautiful celebration. Nowadays, I live my life as always, cherishing flowers. We continue to do business with Mr. Anderson's company, and normalcy has finally returned. Recently, Ethan told us that they were expecting a child, and Bob and I cried tears of joy upon hearing the news. I hope this ordinary, peaceful life continues for a long time to come.